My name is Stephanie Fassler, and I'm the International Affairs Director for the World Affairs Council, Washington, D.C. On behalf of the Council, I welcome you to this Author Series event. Many thanks to our strategic partners, the Ronald Reagan Building and International Trade Center, for their hospitality and use of this space to hold our public programs. These events are filmed for our show, World Affairs Today, and is available on our YouTube channel, Facebook, Twitter, and other digital platforms. This event will be live by 5 p.m. tomorrow evening. In today's rapidly globalizing world, there are many political, social, and cultural shifts taking place. The last decade has seen an increase in Muslim immigration in Europe, creating political and cultural tensions. While many believe this is a new trend, there has been a historic presence of Islamic culture and influence in Europe for centuries. By studying the past influence of Islam in European civilization, can we understand the context of some of the perceived challenges facing Europe today? Ambassador Akbar Ahmed's book, Journey into Europe, Islam, Immigration, and Identity, discusses the history of Islam in Europe and the effects of this history on the present day. To serve as discussant for this Author Series event, we welcome Homa Sorori. Ms. Sorori has over 15 years of professional experience working for different international development organizations, including the United Nations Development Program, Chemonics International, and Deloitte. She focuses her work on policymaking, program development, and implementation of development strategies with national and international organizations. Born in Herat, Afghanistan, Ms. Sorori and her family migrated to Iran, where she completed most of her early education. She holds an MA in International Affairs from the New School University of New York and is a Fulbright alumna. We also welcome Ambassador Akbar Ahmed. The ambassador currently serves as the Ibn Khaldun Chair of Islamic Studies at American University's School for International Service in Washington, D.C. He has also taught at Harvard and Princeton universities. Previously, Ambassador Ahmed served as the former Pakistani High Commissioner to the United Kingdom and Ireland. He has received a number of awards, including the Government of Pakistan's Star of Excellence for Academic Distinction and the Medal of Excellence. Please join me in giving me a warm welcome to Ambassador Ahmed and Ms. Sorori to our World Affairs Council podium.
Thank you, Stephanie, for that very warm welcome. It is such an honor to be here at the World Affairs Council in front of such a distinguished audience. I do want to thank all of you. I would like to acknowledge all of you individually, but I do want to point out my brilliant team that worked with me on this project. And in that team, I'm including my wife, who's with me in the field, Zeenat, who was also the rock of my life, so she's here. And then I'm very fortunate that we have the two senior researchers, Frankie Martin and Harrison. Harrison has just come in from Tennessee with his wonderful Marina, who he's going to be married to in May, so congratulations to both of you. I hope we haven't lost one of our warriors, but gained a warrior, a Wonder Woman warrior. I would also like to welcome my friend Yasir Hamdani, who's one of Pakistan's leading human rights lawyers, a very heroic young man. You can see him sitting there. Show them what a young, heroic Pakistani looks like, Yasir. There he is. Now, I know we are used to only seeing Pakistan in terms of terrorism and terrorist sympathizers, but that man is challenging, literally, the violence and fanaticism in our society by presenting the alternative face of Pakistan. I'm also delighted to see my dear friend Jan Duplan in the audience, and Dr. Eleni. Where is Dr. Eleni? Has she arrived, Dr. Eleni? Well, we are hoping that she'll be joining us. With that, let me plunge in straight away. This book, Journey into Europe, is the fourth of a project I did for Brookings Press, with my trustee team. And this project has taken me over a decade. Now, in case you're thinking this is a very slow professor or a typical professor who just drags out these projects to enjoy life, No, I write very fast. But this was a project which is based in a concept. And I want you to visualize that concept. The concept is to look at the relationship between Islam and the West. And I arrived in Washington, D.C. just before 9/11. I literally come here. First time, I didn't know a soul. I met, of course, my guardian angel, Jan Duplan, very shortly after that. But imagine me, I'm in a class, confronting a bunch of students like you, although they don't look as alert as you do, they look quite bored. They don't know who I was. And then I was told, as we were speaking, that a plane had just flown into the Pentagon. Now, I'd spent a lot of my life in the field as an administrator. So I knew instantly what this meant. I was connecting dots. I knew that this meant there's going to be a huge crisis in the United States. The United States is being struck. I was then told about the New York attacks. The gap would open between Muslims and non-Muslims. I knew that Muslims like me had been working and struggling to create bridges, but not enough work had been done. We had not produced the books, the intellectual arguments. We had let the fanatics and the extremists and the ignoramuses take over much of the Muslim world, resulting in the violence and all these very bizarre and strange movements that you're seeing, people claiming to be speaking on behalf of Islam. So in a sense, people like me had almost been pushed into the margins. And suddenly, we were being told that that is true Islam. I was also seeing after 9/11 commentators, very distinguished names, you'll recognize them, on television, pronouncing grandly about Islam. Islam is this, Islam is that, explaining to me what my religion was. And I'd been studying this religion for decades. And suddenly I felt either I didn't know my religion or these guys had no idea what they're talking about. In either case, we were in trouble. So this forced me to go back to the Greeks. And this is a tip for an audience as sophisticated as you. When in trouble, go back to Socrates. He never fails. What does Socrates tell us about life? Aristotle. Socrates says that the unexamined life is not worth living. You may recall this statement. What does he mean by that? He means you've got to look around you, see what's going on in the world, try to understand your place in the world. Or as Aristotle said, ask yourself, what is the purpose of life? Is it to create a society based in virtue, in good deeds, in compassion? I'm quoting the Greeks. Or is it the violence that I was seeing develop all around me? All around me I was seeing violence. Syria, Afghanistan, where a wonderful moderator comes from, Homa, next to Pakistan. Pakistan was being enveloped in this violence. Since 9/11, and Pakistan had nothing to do with 9/11, something like 60,000 civilians have been killed. 60,000. Billions of property has been destroyed. So Pakistan has been sucked into the war on terror for no rhyme or reason, and that makes Pakistanis very resentful and angry, and we don't fully understand that. Iran was sucked in, Syria, Iraq, the whole map of the world in the Muslim world was changing. So again, I felt really we had to go back to the Greeks and ask questions, go and meet people in the field, and that suited me because I'm an anthropologist by discipline. And I put together my team, I asked them for volunteers, and these wonderful young men, and if you ever doubt America and what American and Americanness means, meet these youngsters. They will refresh your soul. They believe and they are inspired by the vision of the founding fathers, which a lot of people, a lot of adults seem to have forgotten or seem not to have known at all. The Constitution, the Declaration, Reed Jefferson, these are very inspiring figures. These are world figures. They're bringing a new society to the world, late 18th century. It's amazing. Harrison, I hope that's not you. Marina, please keep an eye on him. So we took the team out, and this is what we did. Now, this is very systematic. After all, I am a social scientist, though a lot of people won't consider anthropology as a science, as you know, Frankie, but we do take great pride in the fact that it is a science. So very systematically, I divided Europe into categories. Muslims live there, we are told. Muslims are a problem. They're not part of Europe. They haven't contributed to European civilization. All right, let's ask these questions. How long have they lived in Europe? What have they contributed to Europe? These are the questions, the fundamental questions we are going to raise in the study. Second question, are they a monolith as the media presents? Muslims of Europe, Muslims of America. No, we decided to categorize them. They're Muslims who are immigrants from the Middle East, from South Asia, from different parts of the world. They're Muslims who are local, who've lived in Europe for 500 years, like the Bosnians. The Bosnians have been there, they're blue-eyed blonde. They'll say, we're Europeans, we are nothing else. And we are Muslim, and we are proud of being both. And then the converts. A lot of Europeans are converting to Islam. So immediately you see the categories forming. Then what countries do we look at? You can't simply see Europe. Europe is a combination of different nations, former empires, with different relationships to Islam. And that's a great factor. We again don't take that into consideration. The Algerians coming to France, for example, are coming to France because they were colonized by France. And French imperialism is quite distinct to British imperialism, where South Asians came. South Asians came to Britain. The Muslims coming to Germany were yet again different. They are contract workers. They are what we call guest workers. Again, you see differences. So we made different categories. We made sure we went to the northernmost city in Europe, to the westernmost that we could find. Easternmost, we went to a place called Zante, to places which you won't even know existed, right on the Turkish-Greek border. And at the end of it, we had a very, very rich collection, a treasure chest of interviews, questionnaires, raw material for Europe. We interviewed everyone, like social scientists, the whole category of people, grand muftis, chief rabbis, Archbishop of Canterbury, ordinary students, taxi drivers, professors, right-wing, extreme right-wing groups, their leaders, the whole lot. And from that, we came to certain conclusions. Now remember, this is the fourth project. I need you to keep that in mind. Remember, we're looking at Islam and the West. This is the fourth project. So the first project is looking at this equation from the Muslim point of view. So my team went with me to the Muslim world. We went to the Middle East, to South Asia, to Far East Asia. And we met and had tea with the president of Pakistan, Musharraf was then president. We had lunch with the former prime minister. We met Benazir Bhutto for tea. So we met the whole range of leadership in the Middle East, in Far East Asia, and of course in South Asia. The second project was called Journey into America, because that was how Americans look at the Muslim world. So you're seeing the Islam and the West equation. We're looking at it from 4 different points, 4 different corners. Second, how America looks at the Muslim world. Now, once again, we think we know it because we are seeing this channel or that channel. But in fact, there's a lot of nuance here in the United States, a lot of variation, a lot of surprising interviews and people we met. It was incredible. America is a very, very rich anthropological land, very rich. So we met among the Muslims, and of course we met Jewish people and Christian people and atheists and the whole range. But among the Muslims, because the study focuses on Islam, we again saw 3 categories. The first Muslims, I call them the first Muslim, these are the Africans, the African Americans, the Muslims. And these are very proud Americans and very proud Muslims. Again, remarkable. Some of the most impressive people I met were the African American imams, very wise people. And I repeated this again and again in the media that for God's sake, we are having a problem with the Muslim world. That's 1.5 billion people. This thing will go on and on and on, and we'll be depleted of our resources, and we'll have these endless wars, and I don't know how they're going to end and what the objective is. Get these African American Muslims who are your ambassadors. Let them build bridges for you. There can be no one more proud as an American than the African American Muslims. Then we met the immigrants from the Middle East, from South Asia, and they are new Americans, and they're very proud to be American. Now, they are all, like most Muslims, after 9/11, under a bit of a shadow, so they're having problems. You hear all these cases, these terrible cases of assaults on mosques and women wearing the hijab. And these figures, by the way, have spiked. They're higher than any time in American history. And every American should be concerned about this, because religious freedom, religious pluralism is what defines America. And in one of these discussions, I was sad to see that when I mentioned this, the founding fathers, someone stood up and said, well, yes, but Saddam Hussein does this in Iraq. And I felt really profoundly sad, and I said, I'm so sad to hear what you're saying, because you're actually equating Saddam Hussein with Jefferson and Washington and Franklin. Do you realize what you're saying? I'm not sure whether the individual understood my point, but think of it. When you start comparing yourself to Iraq and Saddam, we are in trouble. So that was the second category, the immigrants. And then the third category, of course, the converts. Now, with the converts, there's a strange cultural phenomena, which I was fascinated because I'm an anthropologist, which is that 4 out of 5 white converts happen to be women. And I asked the anthropological question, why should the freest women on the planet, the most advanced, the most brilliant artists, scholars, great thinkers, from this group, why should 4 out of 5 converts be women? What is going on? What does it tell us about American society? And of course, we had a lot of material on that. It's in the book. Third project was the thistle and the drone. And the thistle represents tribal society. And I took the reference from Tolstoy. If you remember that famous short novel he wrote when he was up in the, among the mountains of the Caucasus with the Imperial Russian army, and he plucked a little thistle and it pricked his fingers, and he realized that you cannot pluck a thistle without being pricked. So he thought, this is Tolstoy thinking, not me, he said, these tribes are like the thistle. They fight back. And then we began to research on the thistle, and we realized that the Scots have the thistle as a symbol, and many other tribes use it as a symbol. So it's a symbol of a proud, independent people. And that study is fascinating, because we looked at, my team and I, the Muslim tribal societies from Morocco right across North Africa into the Middle East and into, again, Central Asia and beyond. And the fascinating conclusions emerged from that. The fourth project is Journey into Europe. So you can see now, again, look at the central focus, Islam and the West, a quartet. 4 different corners, we're looking at the same problem. And the idea, of course, is not, again, original. It's not very common, but it isn't an original idea. As an undergrad in the 60s, I came across the great novelist Lawrence Durrell. And I refer you to his quartet, the Alexandria Quartet. So he took a particular event in the lives of these individuals, and he looked at them, those individuals, from the perspective of different people, the main hero, the woman, and so on. So he called it the Alexandria Quartet, and I was fascinated by that ever since. And then, of course, you have Scott, who wrote the Raj Quartet about India and the time of the British in India. So we can say with great pride, with a great sense of pride, and my team is here, my senior members of the team and some junior members I'm delighted to see, that we have just completed the 4th of the, I could call it the Brookings Quartet or the Washington Quartet, whatever you like to call it, but it has been completed. And this in the social sciences is not very, very common, that we were privileged to be able to complete it. And I must say I owe a great deal of gratitude to my team and to so many other people who helped us and were with us from the start, all of them. They made great sacrifices. Zeenat left her own profession in Washington to come and join us. Frankie and Harrison put their lives on hold. My younger members of the team were with us throughout. My daughter, who's a PhD from Cambridge University, left her Center for Interfaith Dialogue, and came and worked with us. And again, she was working gratis. Zeenat was working gratis. The team was working, I think, on the most meager kind of grants and salaries you can think of, but they were driven by a sense of purpose. And the purpose for these guys was, as young Americans, what can we do to make this world a better place for all of us? Go back to the Greeks. What is the purpose of life? Is it to see this chaos and this violence around us? Or can we somehow do something that will help bring peace, harmony, some order? And you cannot have that without the question Socrates raised, which is understand the society you're living in. And understand it properly on the basis of questions, research, scholarship. This is what we have provided. And in that sense, this is a project that I would hope people will pick up and appreciate. Now, one big point, one big conclusion, which I'll present in front of you, and I'll be happy to discuss if you'd like. One big conclusion was that it's not so much about different people or different cultures. We all know we are different. It really is about how a majority treats a minority. It's simple. You are judged not by how strong you are, how great you are. Empires have come and gone in history, as you know. Roman Empire, the Muslim Empire, the Ottoman Empire, they've come and they've gone. You're judged by and remembered by how you treated people who were weaker than you and who lived amongst you. So today, if you are blaming Islam, as many do, Islam is a religion of violence, Islam is this, Islam treats its people badly, and there's no question about it. Islam does, if you take Islam as the ISIS. And I don't think any Muslim would claim that they represent Islam. They've treated women and minorities in a disgusting manner and deserve to be condemned. And they are now there in the dustbin of history. But we have complaints about the way Pakistanis treat the Christians and its minorities. Egypt treats the Christians and its minorities, and so on. Muslims treating minorities badly. Now reverse this round. Talk to the Muslims in India, and you'll have many, many complaints about discrimination, lack of employment, public humiliation, people being stabbed, people being lynched simply because someone suggested they had beef hidden away in their house. Go on to the East, because we say Islam is violent. And we know that traditional Eastern religions like Hinduism and Buddhism are very peaceful. And they have a beautiful soul, where each individual is commanded to find that sense of inner peace, nirvana, the peace within you. And yet you see what's happening in Myanmar, what's happening in Sri Lanka, where Muslim minorities are literally you're seeing a genocide in Myanmar. And yet we look away. We've got so used to violence targeting children is, I think, the most shameful thing we are seeing in history. Worse than the time of Genghis Khan and all those eruptions from the deserts that came and wiped out civilization, because we are using modern methods of warfare, chemicals, all kinds of missiles to target small children. We are seeing this right across the Middle East. We are seeing this every day in Syria, for example. And we are numb. We don't seem to care. All we are concerned is about our own boundaries. We don't want anyone else to come. Why? Because their color may be different, their religion may be different. So if you start using this yardstick, then you will see all of us are guilty. Muslim and non-Muslim. We are all guilty. Ask yourself, how do we as a majority treat the minority? That will give you an answer how civilized you are as a species, and whether you're able to live up to what Socrates had always urged us to do, which is to seek virtue and knowledge and create societies based in justice, which at the heart really reflect Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, because every society would like that balance in their societies. One theme that ran throughout these studies, and came up again and again, which I want to share with you, and inspired me, was what we learned, at least I learned, from my friend Lord Jonathan Sacks, the former chief rabbi of Britain. He's a great man, great scholar. If you don't know his work, I would urge you to read, for example, The Dignity of Difference, one of his first most important books. Think of it, the title, The Dignity of Difference. He's giving the dignity of difference to the minorities and the non-Jewish people, because that's the difference. They're different. It's a brilliant book. And of course, he wrote it, and there was immediate controversy from his own community. Some people were not happy because not everyone agrees that we should live as fellow human beings and reach out to each other. So the expression I learned from him was tikkun olam. Now, how many of you know this expression? Who doesn't know it? It seems a lot of you don't know it. Anyone here from the Jewish faith who can tell us what it is? Madsen, would you like to enlighten us what it means? Madsen, you've really let me down. She's a student of mine. Harrison, please save us. Good. Please note what he said. Tikkun olam, and I'd like you to remember this phrase. It's a very powerful and beautiful phrase. It's the only thing that'll save this planet. Tikkun olam is a Jewish concept, it's a religious concept, which literally means to heal a fractured world. If you look around you, what I've described to you, it's a fractured world. You can't pretend it isn't. How do you go out and heal it? That's your duty. That's a Jewish saying. And I got that from Lord Jonathan Sacks. Now, to me, that's a very inspiring motto. And I would even think that this is the motto that we, in the 21st century, should adopt as a universal motto. Because for all of us, whether you're Christians or Muslims or Hindus or Buddhists, this is the essence of living together as good neighbors and good human beings and good fellow citizens. All societies. We cannot be smug about us, ourselves, and look down on the others. We are scholars, we came across so much information, some of it very disturbing, and we could talk about this if you like, we could discuss it. But all societies need to really begin to think in terms of tikkun olam. I'll end with this. Refugees. You know, there's such a controversy in the United States about refugees and immigrants, and I'm sorry to say that this most generous and great nation, and it is a great nation, it's a remarkable nation, it's an exceptional nation, but this great nation's treatment of refugees on which this nation was built. Each one of you is an immigrant. I'm presuming none of you are descended from the Native Americans. If that is the case, America has been very, very generous with other immigrants coming to its shores, because that has given you new blood, new ideas, and new dynamism. And some of the greatest figures are immigrants, and some recent immigrants. So when I hear the discussion and the treatment of the Syrians, for example, and every time I raise this, people say, yes, but what has the Muslim world done? Well, the Muslim world, let me give you one or two examples. Syria is exploding, it's imploding. Hundreds of thousands killed, hundreds of thousands, millions escaping from Syria. Turkey has given them refuge. Now, Turkey is itself in turmoil, but it opens its arms and welcomes them. Millions of them live in Turkey. Jordan, and I was privileged to be in a meeting with the King of Jordan when he said the refugees now constitute 1/5 of his population. And he said, we are really under pressure, economic pressure, political pressure, but they are welcome because they are people in trouble. Pakistan, which is so maligned in the press, welcomed something like 5 million Afghan refugees that were escaping the Russian occupation of Afghanistan. Now, Pakistan doesn't have many resources. It's not a rich country. So when I hear the debate here and people are debating, should we allow 5,000 or 10,000, I think of a country like Pakistan, which has opened its arms to 5 million refugees. I again say it's the humanity. We have to reach out and understand that that refugee or immigrant is not here because he loves us so much. He's here because he is escaping with his life. He may be living in a situation where he may not even be able to live as a human being. His life is in danger, his family is in danger, his children are in danger. And that, I hope, will evoke the notion of tikkun olam, to reach out in compassion and in friendship and in a genuine sense of a common humanity. So with that, I'll end because I know that we'd prefer to have a conversation, and I know that Huma is waiting with notes to start it. So thank you very much. Thank you. You want me to move them?
Ambassador Ahmad, thank you so much for the excellent presentation and a brief review of the book. We are all excited. I mean, I'm excited to read the book, and I watched the film that you made this morning, and it's amazing that how you started with the history and connected it to the recent trends in immigration and Islam in West. I have a few questions that I would like to pose to you, and then we will leave the floor open to the participants to ask their questions. So my first question, what are the biggest issues that Europe is facing today when it comes to Muslim immigration?
Thank you, Huma, and thank you for moderating this session. I'm really grateful. The biggest issues are interconnected. So you have the issue of terrorism. You can't pretend it doesn't exist. You have all the terrible strikes in Paris, in Brussels. You had that young Muslim driving his truck in Nice. You had that young man slitting the throat of a Catholic priest. These are genuine acts of terror, and people are really very worried in Europe. So all the Islamophobia that was latent, perhaps, has now come to the surface. And people are saying enough is enough. That's one. Second, the genuine fear of millions of immigrants just turning up without regulation. Every country can be generous, has to be generous for Tikkun Olam, but there need to be rules, regulations. People can come in through the regular channels, not just barge in and see immigration as a right. Every country has its own rules and way of operating. Thirdly, you have connected to these the rise of the far right, who are now reviving some of the rhetoric. And this is something strange which you may be interested in, the rhetoric that we heard in the 1930s and 40s. It isn't something that's disconnected to the language of that time. We are hearing it again, and we give many examples in the book. People talking of concentration camps, of soap factories. Those are the things that the Germans were talking about in the 1930s, and we were hearing them again. Particularly alarming is the rise of Islamophobia in a very crude form and anti-Semitism. So that's another thing. Europe, a lot of Europeans are worried about that. Then there's the economic crisis. There's unemployment. And all of these are interconnected. So people blame the Muslims. When they say, oh, we can't get a job, Muslims are to blame. And I want to point out something, Homa. When you say Muslims are to blame, you're going down a slippery slope. It's a dangerous slope. Because today you attack one minority, the Muslims. Tomorrow you'll attack the Hindu minority who have nothing to do with Muslims, who may be a very well-behaved, law-abiding minority. But if you see a Hindu in the streets, as happens very often, someone will come and attack them, or they'll think they're from the Middle East. Or Sikh, again a very beautiful and peaceful religion. Many Sikhs have been attacked. Some have been killed here in the United States. They confuse them because they see a turban and a beard and they think he's a Muslim. And then, of course, the next round, you move on and you attack Jewish people, a Jewish cemetery, a Jewish museum, which again is happening. And you can see why, Huma, Europe is now alarmed, and they don't really seem to have answers. What do you do with the immigration problem? That has to be solved, and has to be solved boldly and wisely and as soon as possible.
Thank you. I would like to hear your perspective on what lessons can we learn from the history of Islam in Europe that can be applied to recent Muslim immigration.
That's a very good question, Huma, and I've thought a lot about it. Europe has an answer to its own problems. We think of Europe, and I'm giving you examples from the 1930s, but Europe has an answer to its own problems. And it lies in those European societies from the past which had a genuine sense of pluralism, which advocated pluralism and showed us how to live as plural societies. Now, we are in America, we are very proud of America and American pluralism and the vision of the Founding Fathers, again, rooted in pluralism. So it's interesting for us to look at Europe's pluralism. Now, Europe's pluralism is not coming from democracy, but is coming from a very enlightened series of rulers, both Muslim and non-Muslim. So when Muslims ruled in Andalusia, you had a time, it of course doesn't stay, it changes, another regime will come in and change things. But there's a time when Jews, Christians, Muslims are able to live together, work together, and create together. There's a time when the ruler of Cordoba is a Muslim, his chief minister is Jewish, and his ambassador to the courts of Europe is an archbishop, a Roman Catholic archbishop. What an example. Now reverse this. In Sicily, in South Italy, you had Christian rulers behaving with the same sense of inclusiveness. Frederick II, the great emperor, Holy Roman Emperor, he in fact was possibly the most powerful man of Europe. He was the owner of all of Europe from England down to Greece. And this man spoke Arabic, had an Arabic bodyguard in his personal bodyguard. He had Arabic inscription on his mantle, and he went out of his way to protect Jews and Muslims. His ancestor Roger II, the king of Sicily, same examples. His main advisor was Al-Idrisi, an Arab. Now I'll give you an example which is stunning. We are in the 21st century, for God's sake. This man is living 1,000 years ago. Roger II, very devout Christian. He respected Al-Idrisi so much that when Al-Idrisi would come to his court, think of it, can you give me any example like this today? He would stand up out of respect for Al-Idrisi's knowledge. All of these kings had one thing in common, whether the Andalusian kings or the Christian kings, they respected knowledge. And you know that ilm or knowledge in Islam is a very, very respected feature of Islam. One of the things I can say with great pride is that Islam emphasizes ilm or knowledge. There's a very famous saying of the Prophet of Islam, which is, the ink of the scholar is more sacred than the blood of the martyr. Just ponder on this a bit. The ink of the scholar is more sacred than the blood of the martyr. Now think if the Muslim world understood this saying of the Prophet and said, wait a minute, why are we all locked in all these wars and violence and involved in the bloodshed? We should be spending our time in libraries and working and studying and creating books and knowledge and contributing to science and literature and astronomy and mathematics, which is what the Muslim world did in Andalusia. Andalusia at one time, this is when Muslims lived in Andalusia, Cordoba, the main capital of Andalusia, had a library with 600,000 books and manuscripts. Just think of the figure, 600,000, Cordoba. When the largest library in Europe then had 600 books. 600,000, 600. Note these figures. Yasser, do you understand these figures? See the contrast. And now flip it around. When Harvard University, and this is about a decade back, produced more scholarly pamphlets and books alone, one university, Harvard University, than the entire Arab world put together. Now this is your big question, Muslims and non-Muslims. What happened? I'm giving you an example of the Muslim world way ahead in scholarship. That's the time of Muslim scholarship and knowledge and history and science. That is when they're making a huge impact on European civilization. And that is your answer to the extreme right wing who say Islam did not contribute to Europe. That is your answer. When in fact, European literature, from Robinson Crusoe to the Divine Comedy, Dante, even to Michelangelo, all of these have evidence of being influenced by Islam. And above all, perhaps the most important contribution, that Averroes, the greatest philosopher of his time, Averroes worked out on the basis of his studies of the Greeks, he was a great fan of Aristotle, how to balance faith and reason. Because the dilemma for all of us of the Abrahamic faiths was, how do you balance your faith? You believe in things because your God tells you, your holy book tells you, your priests tell you. How do you balance that with your logic? What science tells you, what empiricism tells you, what your research tells you. How do you balance this? And therefore, a lot of priests would say you cannot balance it. A good human being cannot be secular. He cannot be an atheist and look at science objectively. He must say, no, God has done everything. God is to take the credit or the blame for our woes on this planet. Averroes worked out as a Muslim, he's a great Muslim scholar, he was the head priest of Cordoba, the Qazi, that in fact you can balance the two. That was his genius, and that comes straight into Christianity through Thomas Aquinas, Saint Thomas Aquinas, perhaps the greatest theologian of the Christian church. From Aquinas it comes into mainstream Christianity, and it eventually leads to the freeing of the shackles of religious dogma. So the argument was you can be a good Christian and a scientist and a secular humanist. And the world opens up. With the Jewish faith, it comes through Maimonides, again the same logic, and through him again into Western Europe. So you can see that this is the impact that Muslims are having in Europe. And to answer your question, this is what Europeans and Muslims can contribute. That here we have something, we have a model. Of course, you cannot repeat history, but we can learn from history. Unfortunately, we do not learn from history because this period of history is just not taught. So if you go to schools, no one knows about this. Because history, a lot of Spanish converts told us especially, they said for us, history begins after 1492. Before this, there's no history. And you know what happened in 1492? And don't mention Christopher Columbus. What happened in 1492 minus Columbus? Anyone? There you are. Jews and Muslims are expelled finally from Spain, 1492. That's the end. That's the end of Jews and Muslims in the Iberian Peninsula. After that, there's no history being taught. So the young Spanish scholar, student growing up, has no idea of the past, what I'm telling you. So he only sees Muslims as terrorists, immigrants, dirty, filthy, throw them out. So the first thing, Omar, is for us to start teaching each other about ourselves. That's why this very ordinary seeming, prosaic profession of teaching assumes such an importance. Or at least that's how I like to fool myself. Because without that, how are you going to communicate this to the people and to the younger generation? You can't. That's why I'm so proud of my students, all these students sitting here. Shushmita from India, Anna looking very bored as always in class. Frankie Martin. Yes. Omar, do you want to open it up?
Sure. That's a very important lesson that we keep forgetting or ignoring, but totally agree. So based on your book, what are some of the differences that you have seen among European countries in how they handle Muslim immigrants?
Again, a very, very interesting question. Now look at the surface. What difference do you see in the countries? Take Britain. Now in Britain, you know, we are hearing reports of some tension growing against Muslims recently. But I spent a lot of my time in Britain being educated, and I lived there. In Britain, you have over a dozen members of the House of Lords and the House of Commons. So you actually have Muslim lords, Muslim members of parliament. Not one or two, but more than a dozen, and dozens of councillors and many mayors, I think half a dozen mayors in England. So the British Muslim has made a big impact. You have British Muslim presenters on television, major presenters, BBC. You even had a captain of the cricket team in England, English cricket team. I know you're from Afghanistan, you're just starting to learn how to play cricket, but you know, we come from India and Pakistan, we are way advanced. You're catching up, you're doing very well. So here in England, to think of a Pakistani captain of the English cricket team is really a great gesture, and I applaud the English for that gesture. Today, one of the greatest cricketers in England, the most popular cricketer, is a Muslim with a beard. You'll be more than your Taliban back home, you know, this big, 1 foot, and yet he's the most popular cricketer in England. So that's England. France, on the other hand, out of, I don't know what was the figure, Frankie, of the assembly where they had 300 members or something, and what, 1 Muslim? Or maybe not even that. So they do not have that kind of employment access that they should have according to their population. Therefore, you see the tension. I think they have a lot of problems there. So countries are different. Germany had a lot of problems, but recently they began to approach this in a very systematic and methodical way. So they're making a very strong, determined effort to understand the Muslim problem and do something about it. They're opening up chairs of Islamic studies. That's a great initiative. They're opening up Islamic centers. There's a great effort. It's a very, very German approach that there's a problem, you go out and solve it. So let's hope they succeed. We had on campus, when was it, Anna? A couple of months ago, when the House of One, we had this remarkable German initiative. Just think of it, what I'm going to tell you. The imam, the rabbi, and the priest got together in Berlin and initiated a House of One project. It's called a House of One. That means this is the House of One, where in this house, we all worshippers of the Abrahamic faiths come together and say our prayers and live together. So you can see the differences in the communities.
Thank you so much. Now we would like to...
I think Yasser had a question there.
Yes, open the floor so you can queue here.
Yes. For all those that wish to ask questions, we just ask that you queue here. We can have a line going. And again, just so that we can get through as many questions as possible, please limit yourself to 1 question and do make sure that it is a question. Thank you.
Dr. Saab, thank you for an extraordinary presentation as always. Let me just say to begin with, and I know I'm supposed to ask a question, but I must say this, that, you know, the work that you've done since the 90s with Jinnah Quartet and, you know, after that, what you've done, is extraordinary. It's a personal inspiration for a lot of people. And, you know, I know that you get a lot of criticism back home for a lot of things you say, which is ridiculous, but, you know, that's how it is. Pakistanis have this problem of bringing down people who actually try and help them. So that, unfortunately, is a national psyche. In terms of some of the things that I do want to talk about, and this would be wearing a little bit off of the minority status of Muslims but what I want to talk about is this fact that I've been reading at Harvard, of course, some of the, you know, earlier manuscripts and historical narratives of how Islam and sort of the state interacted. And what I get from it is that in the initial period from, you know, when the great jurisprudence was being developed, the Islamic jurisprudence, the great jurists, Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Hanbal, and others, they maintained and even Imam Jafar, maintained a specific distance from the state. So they did not allow the so-called, which is such a great scare in this country as well, and it, you know, the codification of Sharia, as it were, or fiqh. So this codification is a post-colonial thing in Muslim majority countries. So I just wonder if there is any way of sort of bringing that the way Islam was actually, the Islamic jurisprudence, which is, you know, something that covers everything, you know, essentially, how to sort of reconceptualize it in modern times. And this would be relevant to both Muslims in minority positions and Muslims in majority positions. So I was just wondering if you could touch on that.
Thank you, Yasser. That's really a fundamental question for Muslim societies. And thank you for those very kind words. This question can only be answered by Islamic lawyers like you, because this is the task of a lifetime. And as you know, the great Islamic thinkers like Allama Iqbal, you know Huma, he's one of our great poets from the East. They were, in fact, grappling with this very issue. Now, I would look at it like this, Yasir. The very word Sharia today has been reduced into such a caricature with so much controversy around it that people have no understanding what it even means. That's why scholars have to approach it, step back and analyze it and understand it from the point of view of the great imams that you mentioned. And you're absolutely right, the great scholars of Islam stayed away from power. And when they were working on this great corpus of law, a lot of them, as you know, suffered. They were arrested by the rulers, some were killed by the rulers because they maintained an independence. Now, to go back to them, to recreate their corpus of law, and then to adjust it with the 21st century, it's going to be a monumental task. Now, when I look around at the Muslim world, they're living through such great crises, political crises, economic crises, that they're so distracted from this task that you have all these glib answers. There's a problem, Sharia means chop people's hands, chop people's head off, give them a couple of lashes. That is not the spirit of Sharia at all. In fact, the Prophet had said, and there's no greater authority than the Prophet, that compassion always trumps even law. Islamic law must be ruled by compassion because ultimately it is about human beings. It is not simply about applying the law blindly. And these are elements that are missing in law today as I see it, including those countries like Saudi Arabia or Iran that actually apply what they call the Sharia. So this task, which has to be really, I pray at some stage, some scholars like you get together and dedicate your next 10 years like we've done with this quartet in studying this and saying, how do we bring it out of this, the cobwebs, and apply it to our times? It's a huge challenge. It must be done, and I think a country like Pakistan is ideally placed because it has a tradition of scholarship, and there are intelligent enough people there to begin to apply it. So good luck to you in doing it. My team is always there to help you, Asir. Just tell them and they all come. As long as you get Shushmita a visa.
Please have your question.
Great. Thank you, Ambassador, for the lovely discussion, especially when it came to Islam and Europe and all the history behind it. I am a medical scientist. I'm a neuroscientist in particular, and I am a Muslim, someone of Muslim faith living in Europe. I live in Sweden right now, and I moved from Australia to Sweden about 3 years ago. And so much so that it was great, the whole background and history that you gave, but what I see right now in Sweden, it was a good plateauing out of acceptance of the refugees from Syria in particular to Sweden, and now there's a sudden drip of how the local population is supporting that sentiment. And, you know, Sweden is now about 22, 23% population of Sweden is supporting the neo-Nazis in the parliament. That's the official number, last January that I checked. But there's a huge sentiment of empathy and compassion for people who are from the Syrian background who've immigrated into Sweden right now. And as long as they are, you know, I work in a hospital, I'm a doctor otherwise, so as long as they're the cleaners of the hospital, they work in canteens and, you know, doing all that kind of stuff at the background. But it doesn't matter, I'm not a Syrian, but I am someone of Muslim faith, and they don't know when they see me, you know, when they come and see me in my outpatient clinic, they don't see who I am, they don't know, they just automatically look at me and say, ah, Muslim, you know, Dr. Sheikh. So, you know, majority of the population have compassion and empathy for those people who are actually working and doing those other jobs. But when they see someone like me, they suddenly can't accept that and can't comprehend that situation where a Syrian is a doctor, or someone like me could be this, you know, secular, progressive, whatever I call myself, and still is this kind of a person, because they don't think that this is, you know, an automatic kind of correlation. So what's your insight on this? And, you know, because most people know that Swedes are very, very friendly and extremely empathetic to this situation, but when I see in Sweden now, since like 3-4 years that I've been in Sweden, I don't actually see that. especially for people like me, you know. They see the cleaners and they see, oh, you know, that economic class, but not for people like me. So I'd really like to know what's your insight on this.
What is the question?
So the question is that why is this happening, and you know why are they?
Well, the short answer to why is it happening is in the book, and I've spent several years writing it, and it's 600 pages, almost 600 pages of an answer. So I'll try to summarize that in a minute, which is that it's exactly the same frame as is happening in the rest of Europe. The Scandinavians have been perhaps the most generous and the most understanding because they could control the immigrants in terms of numbers. So if 10 came, 15 came, 20 came, they wouldn't have a problem. Suddenly they're alarmed because not only do you have many, many more pouring in, many insisting, and suddenly you correlate that with acts of violence, and they begin to say this is going to disrupt our society, and they, above all, are a society of law and order, and they feel that's being threatened and challenged.
There hasn't been a single.
No, there've been incidents. The right wing has attacked the refugees.
That's what.
No, but that doesn't matter. Remember that if you're in charge of law and order and you have an incident, you're not saying who attacked who. You're simply saying there was an incident, as they have been happening. Yeah. And then you have all those characters who come out dressed like creatures out of Star Wars or some, with helmets and so on. So suddenly society is getting alarmed and they're saying, this is not who we are. And they're blaming who? The immigrants. So it simply means you will have to try much harder. You have to understand your fate is linked with the other refugees. You're not alone anymore. Early on you could say, I'm a doctor, I have nothing to do with them. Now you're not. Because you are, in a sense, the chief rabbi of Denmark, the retired chief rabbi, a wonderful man. Harrison and I went to see him and we filmed him. He said something beautiful. He said, in our Jewish community, if one Jewish man did something wrong or broke the law, the entire community would be blamed. That's how society is. So he said, because Muslims are being accused now, so if one Muslim commits an act of terror, the whole community is involved. So you have to understand that, and your leadership has to understand that, and unless you internally begin a process of reform or education or some kind of enlightenment, you'll have more and more problems because people think, I'm an individual, I'll do something silly, not realizing the impact it has on the whole community. So don't be discouraged, keep going, you have a responsibility. An educated immigrant like you, a doctor, a sheikh, you have a great sense of responsibility on your shoulders. So good luck to you.
Thank you.
We have 4 more questions and a few more minutes. Please have your question brief. So
good evening. Thank you to the World Affairs Council and Salam Alaikum, Ambassador Ahmed. I just came back from Spain and Andalusia, Sevilla, Madrid, and Rome, Italy. Not as a tourist, because I have family there and went visiting, and I feel the pulse of the people locally. As you know, on Sunday they had an election in Italy. And there's quite now feeling of resistance to accept these Muslim refugees. Not so much immigrants, because when you say immigrants, the individual have skills. These are people that are desperate, running away from war conflicts. As you know, London has the largest Muslim community in Europe, and you have a mayor who's a Muslim.
Yes.
Here in the United States, we had a president, Obama Hussein, whose basic education was Muslim.
Yes.
Now, my feeling is this. The problem or the fracture, it is from the imams, from the different Muslim communities, that the imams themselves are actually predicting or giving education to be extremists. And that's why Daesh exists. Is that true?
Well, that's exactly what I'm pointing out. Unless Muslims, Muslim leaders especially, begin a process of educating their own communities, you will have the men of violence. I gave you a more concrete example of people like ISIS taking the leadership and claiming to represent Islam. That is the battle within Islam. Now, for the record, and you know this, are you Spanish yourself?
Yes, I am.
What part of Spain are you from?
Well, actually, I was born in South America, in Venezuela, but I have families in Madrid.
But originally from Spain?
Yes.
But from Andalusia?
Yes, and in fact, like you say in the history, the Moors, the people from Morocco, the culture is all mixed, and it gets fine and dandy. But it's not any longer like that. The Muslims have created their own fracture.
Yes. Well, you've put your own finger on the problem. We met and interviewed hundreds of Spaniards, both Andalusia from the north and in Italy. And the mayor of Palermo said something that struck us. It's a Christian mayor of Palermo in Sicily. He said, when I'm in a mosque, I become a Muslim. When I'm in a synagogue, I'm Jewish. He said, this moment I'm Christian. Because he said, I feel close to God. It doesn't matter what name I have. And he said, I'm quoting him now. He said, no man is an illegal immigrant. The word illegal shouldn't exist for people. He said, that's why people come to Sicily. But people are fed up. I agree with you. They're fed up exactly for the reasons I just shared with our doctor from Sweden. They are fed up because of the numbers of refugees coming. In Spain, you had that terrible accident with the train, the sabotage and the terrorist strike. You're getting undocumented people coming. They're resisting the borders. We went to Melilla. We were in Melilla for several days. We saw the border, the fence. They jump over the fence. So if you're Spanish, you'd be very alarmed because you need to have some sense of control. Otherwise, your society will be affected. And there's the economic situation, which is not very good, and that's being affected. So these are genuine problems. My point is that sooner or later, governments have to come up with a solution. Either you send them all back in a humane way, or make some adjustments to settle some, have some yardstick. But the present situation cannot continue because we interviewed people, human beings like you and me, and they were in a terrible condition. So I know that the Spanish and the Italian, the southern part of Europe, has been very, very human and humane in treating the refugees. They really have. And we attribute it to your old history of convivencia, of living together. But that's changing. The mood is changing. And it could change even further. So we have to be very sensitive to that. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you.
My question centers on two countries that were and are American allies, or at least one of them is. Sunni Turkey and Shia Iran. After World War II, they did build bridges to the West, but what is happening with them now?
Great question, because I often think of that. It's not just Turkey and Iran. You missed out the third partner, and that is Pakistan. During the 60s, you may not remember, but America was confronting the Soviet Union. And America formed what was called the CENTO and CETO. Do you remember that? CENTO, meaning the Central Asian Treaty Organization. And that constituted of Turkey, Iran, and Pakistan. Those were the three pillars to stop the Soviet Empire coming to the south, led by America. And in the east, further to the east, because Pakistan then was also had East Pakistan, because of that, America could extend its influence right up to Burma and beyond. Very close and mutually acceptable. And then things began to change with the Shah of Iran. We lost Iran, and then very quickly you saw other developments. Taliban took over in Afghanistan, and you had all kinds of complication. And really, in a sense, we are seeing the playing out of all those dramas. We are seeing the unfinished drama. And I am extremely concerned and apprehensive because I don't see how this is going to end. I don't see how Afghanistan is going to end. We've been there for, I don't know what, how many years now? 15, how many? 17 years. I still don't know what the objective is, the end objective. Is it regime change? Is it a completely new country to be formed? Is it to pack up and leave? Is it just to bomb every Afghan till they don't exist? I don't know. And no one's told me. And I'm a scholar of that area. Secondly, I don't know what the Taliban want in the end. Because they are again in charge of, what, 40% of Afghanistan now?
So there are different data on that.
But you can say 30, 35, 40. They're back. I mean, they haven't disappeared. So they're very much there. Then you have Pakistan. This same problem has affected Pakistan now. So there's so much generalized violence. You have mosques being attacked, schools being attacked, school children being attacked. For the first time in Pakistan history, this has never happened. So it's not such an easy solution. When you look at what's happening there, you have every reason to be alarmed, and you really, again, in Washington, need a clear, bold, compassionate, and wise policy for those countries. Now, if you know of any policy like that, with this frame, please tell me about it and cheer me up.
What about Turkey?
Have you got any policy like this?
What about Turkey?
Beg your pardon?
What about Turkey?
Turkey's in the same situation. It was a very stable, strong country, very pro-America, very pro-West. As you know, that was its model. It wanted to be like a European power. It's been urging Europe, banging on its doors to join. But it's been denied for decades, and I think they've reached a point when they feel that Europe just doesn't want them because they're Muslim. So there's a reaction in Turkey, and then you have the problem with the Kurds, and you have the internal problems with all the recent problems with the Golans and so on. So the result is that Turkey, which was once a rising power, and I must say that the Muslim world admired Turkey, is now suddenly facing a lot of crises, and that impacts the United States. We must understand that those were countries on which the United States built its foreign policy. These are the key states called pivotal, according to foreign policy experts: Turkey, Iran, Pakistan. And we are in the process of losing all three. Take a look at the map and ask yourself, these three countries go, along with Afghanistan, what is the future? Because you have then China very interested in that region. You have Russia very interested in the region. Iran is interested in that Afghanistan region. India is interested in that. So surely America needs to be not only present, but present in a way that we export what America really stands for. And I go back to the Founding Fathers. Democracy, human rights, civil liberties, the message of the Founding Fathers.
Okay.
Thank you. Are you finished? One more question? One more?
Thank you for the depth of scholarship that you've brought to these issues. The question I have is about those who do not learn the way you learn. Experiential learning, those who are most likely to gravitate to the extreme right and are not reading the books that you referred to or listening to the scholars that you're talking about. Have you seen ways to reach the learning process of those who don't attend university or other scholarships?
No, that's a great observation, because really scholars have to step out of their classrooms. They have to share their knowledge. They have to write books. They have to try to make films or documentaries so the word is spread. That's what you're talking about. And I have tried everything. I've been in a situation where I've lost my entire economic wealth, whatever it was, very limited, I have to admit. But we sacrificed, my wife and I. We didn't hesitate. We made films, we wrote books, we traveled. We haven't given up because we understand that the stakes are very high. In Pakistan, Yasser, where is Yasser? Is he around? Yasser has written a book on Mr. Jinnah, the founder of Pakistan. Now, for me, Jinnah is important because he symbolizes a certain kind of Pakistan, what is called a moderate Pakistan. I won't use that word. I'd use some other word, but a Pakistan which is inclusive. A Pakistan with rights for minorities, for women, for the constitution. A Pakistan in which he said, this Jinnah's quote, he said, the Hindus are free to go to their temples, Christians to their churches, Muslims to their mosques. That is not the business of the state. Whose first cabinet, small cabinet, 7 people, he had a Hindu as one of his ministers. This is Mr. Jinnah. He had an Ahmadi, a community that was declared non-Muslim, as his most important minister, the foreign minister. That was Mr. Jinnah. Now, how many people even know about this aspect of Jinnah, that he had a vision of a Pakistan that balanced tradition and modernity. So I decided in the late 1980s, I was at Cambridge to actually, your question, how do you spread the message? I decided to make a quartet on Jinnah called the Jinnah Quartet, a feature film, a documentary film, an academic book, and a comic book, So you see, I didn't lack ambition even then. And I didn't lack lunacy, because it was a completely act of lunacy, because to do one of these would have been an achievement because it had not been done. And of course, I didn't realize the forces that were then unleashed against me and my family. We had literally people wanting to kill us and lynch us, and there was a campaign to stop it. And I often asked why. It was because the interpretation of Jinnah would influence how Pakistanis see themselves. Now, they can either see themselves through Jinnah's vision, the founding father, or these other alternative visions which you're seeing now. People blowing up minorities, schools, Christians, Muslims, Sufis, anyone. You don't like someone, blow them up. That is the vision that is an alternative to Jinnah, like Mahatma Gandhi in India. If you recall, Gandhi was assassinated precisely because he advocated a pluralist India. He began his prayer meetings by reading from the Quran, the Muslim holy book, from the Bible, and then the Hindu text. He was shot. So, to answer your question, we need to get out there and continue, and scholars need to do this, the humanists need to do this, the activists need to do this, but get the message. They may not always succeed, but the effort has to be made. And we need your assistance. The Americans sitting here looking at the Muslim world and saying these are all terrorists, that doesn't help us at all, because we are not all terrorists. And we are not all wanting to fight the West. And we are not all wanting an Islamic fundamentalism to rule our societies. We want successful, prosperous Muslim societies, modern Muslim societies that were envisaged by people like Jinnah or Iqbal. That's what we want.
I want to dovetail to your presentation about Europe. You outlined a different view of Muslims or status of Muslims in England, Germany, and we know Germany is both sides, right? But France, I want to hear your views on France. It's sort of an enigma because they're anti-Muslim, there's very strong anti-Semitism right now, and yet they're such a liberal country. And they had Muslims in France forever. What is your explanation?
That's again, are you French?
No, but I'm European. I lived in France for a long time.
Well, you have a certain French style.
Okay.
And I mean that as a compliment, a very elegant style. Well, France is a special case. As you say, it's a civilization based on that famous phrase, liberty, fraternity, equality. The most beautiful concepts. France gave us the French Revolution. It gave us the Enlightenment. But I want to ask you, are those values only for white Christian French or for everyone?
I think there is a large group in France which sees themselves as that's for all.
Think of the question I've asked you and ponder it tonight. Don't give a quick answer, because go and talk to the French Muslims, and they will say these are beautiful concepts, but we are not included in them. And as I said earlier, if you do not include the minority, you are failing your own standard. Because when Rousseau and these great philosophers gave you these concepts, did they mean all of society, which is what I think they meant, they're philosophers, or did they mean only people like us, white people? If that is the case, then France is failing. And if that is the case, then the far right are right, because they then say, sorry, this country is only not for the brown and black people who come from Asia and Africa. That's your challenge. So that answers your question about France, which is a beautiful country with these beautiful ideas, and it gave the lead. It actually was the leader of the world, and these ideas then come to the United States via France. So again, and we face the same challenge. We have to start thinking seriously here in the United States. So think about the philosophic concept of citizenship and ask yourself, what would an Algerian say to this point? Not a mainstream French person.
Thank you.
And I do want to end with Napoleon Bonaparte. I have a weakness for him also. Napoleon Bonaparte went to Cairo. You remember that? I'm not saying you were there then, but I'm just saying you remember from history. Bonaparte arrives in Cairo. Now, all of you, especially my American friends, because we are going through this phase of Islamophobia. This is Napoleon Bonaparte, perhaps one of the great military geniuses of all time, and we won't talk of Waterloo. He arrives in Cairo, and he defeats the Egyptian army, the Turks, the Mamluks, and he gives a dinner to which he invites the sheikhs of Al-Azhar, the great Islamic university. Hundreds of the sheikhs come. And what is Napoleon wearing? He wears the Arab robes of a sheikh. And the dinner doesn't serve alcohol. And he says, he gives a public speech, and he says, I am Ali. He gives himself the name Ali, which, as you know, in Islam is a great name. And he says, this Quran is the most beautiful religion. The Prophet is my hero. I'm going to follow his example. So suddenly you're seeing Napoleon being looked at by the Muslims, and they say, my God, the respect he's giving us, because you know every human being wants respect. And the Muslims are saying, he's better than our rulers, the Mamluks. We love him more than the Mamluks. So at one instance, with this gesture, he wins over the local population. That was Napoleon Bonaparte. Now, had he lived, had his policies been implemented by the next wave of the French, things would have been different. But immediately after him, when the French come to Algeria, in about 2 decades later, they have a very different policy. It's called the regime of the saber. Saber, you know, is the sword. So it was just kill, burn, kill, burn. Any Algerian, put him off the land, take his land, if he even looks at you, kill them. And within a few decades, these are the figures. What is the exact figure, Frankie? 2 decades, 3 decades? 2/3 of the population is killed. 2/3. So when you say France, keep that in mind. Keep that figure in mind.
Ambassador Ahmed, Homa, thank you so much for sharing your time and expertise with us this evening. Please join me in thanking them.